Welcome to Marriage Now What? We have John with us today. You know, John, I was driving this morning and not particularly thinking about it, but I was talking to my daughter and I said, you know, you have to watch the way that people talk to you or react to you. And without even thinking about it, I'm going into behavior groups with her. And she says, you know, well, why do people do that? And so I went into each behavior group and kind of talked about it. And I says, you know, they really can't help it. It's just the way that they're going to think and react based on how you do something. I said, it's not your fault that you did something wrong. It's just how they perceive what you did. And I didn't even realize that at 10 years old, she starts talking about her friends and this happened and that happened. And she can understand that now that she's been aware or awakened to that knowledge, she can start applying that to her life. So thank you for coming in, and just wanted to kind of go through the different 5 behavior groups for marriage so that husbands and wives can see that, in each other. And then next week we'll talk about how that looks with kids and how we should react as parents to the kids. So will you introduce the 5 different styles of behavior groups?
Yeah, so we've got 5 different major, they call them the big 5 personality types or behavior groups. And these big 5 behavior groups were kind of, derived from researchers that first started studying personality types and personality traits. Traits are like subgroups of personality types, and they aggregate up to these more complex types. But every researcher that studied personality was naming these different personality types that they found by their own labels, which made it confusing for people to understand. Are we talking about the same thing? Are we talking about different things? And so after thousands of studies had been done, researchers began to do what are a statistical analysis called a meta-analysis. And the meta-analysis studies, right? Doesn't come up with new subjects and talk to them about their personalities, but rather looks across all the studies that have been done and looks for commonalities and differences among the studies. And looking at all these studies on personalities, they came up with what are now known as the big 5 personality types. And the big 5 personality types, there's an acronym that helps us remember them. CANOE is one, CANOE. You can rearrange those letters and you can use ocean. We'll use CANOE for fun, right? CANOE, the C stands for conscientiousness. And we'll talk in just a minute about what that is. I want to get the labels out there, then we'll go back and fill in what the different labels mean. So C is conscientiousness, A is agreeableness, N is neuroticism, O is openness to experience or openness, and E is extroversion. Now, probably the one that most people recognize right away is the extrovert, right? The extrovert is an outgoing person. They're usually somebody who finds their way to be the center of attention in a group. When we talk about the big 5 personality types, we actually expand that a little bit. It's not just outgoing in a social setting. We also talk about somebody who has kind of a high need to be the center of attention, maybe a higher need for power. They tend to be more assertive, maybe even dominant in their social interactions. And if that's taken to extremes, they might be aggressive, not just assertive, but aggressive and domineering as opposed to just dominant, just a lead. So that's that E. Openness to experience is somebody who's flexible in their thinking. They're open to change. They tend to be more adaptive. They tend to be able to see things from different perspectives, so they're not locked into their own perspective. They have this flexibility of thought that enables them to kind of look around an issue and see it from different perspectives. They tend to be willing to try new things, and actually they thrive in those kinds of settings where change is more common. Neuroticism, that name is probably the most loaded name. When we think of somebody who's neurotic, we think of somebody who's a little off kilter, a little hard to predict. And so neuroticism actually does have to do with kind of your emotional stability or volatility. So if you're more on the end of the scale towards neuroticism, you tend to be a little bit more emotionally labile is the term, a little bit more volatile, bigger mood swings, more emotionally reactive, not as in control of your emotions. They tend to control you a little bit more. The opposite end of that continuum is if you are well adjusted. Adjustability is the other term, and that means you're more even-keeled, more in control of your emotions. Doesn't mean that you don't have emotions. It just means that you don't let them drive your decision-making or drive your response in the moment. You're able to kind of set your emotions aside and use them more, I guess, constructively is the way that I would say that. We're working our way backwards. The A here is agreeableness. And so agreeableness is somebody who's very socially, they want to be liked. They're not necessarily outgoing. They tend to be connectors more one-on-one than in control or in charge in a group, the most visible person in a group. They often thrive based on these relationships and based on making this contact with other people, so they're highly social people. That sociability and that wanting to be liked can make them maybe seem insecure, because if they're not getting that acceptance from other people, then they may respond in a way that makes them question whether they're worth anything, right? So they tend to kind of be insecure about their feelings and their position in groups in many cases. And then the C, conscientiousness, is somebody who's very detail-oriented, somebody who's very organized. They tend to be high performers. Perfectionists is something that is a label that's often attached to somebody who's conscientious. They tend to be very aware of how they do things and how others are doing things, and they can come off as being judgmental. If you don't do it the way that I do it, then you're not good enough for them. So they tend to be micromanagers in the workplace, although they tend to be very good workers because they're diligent, they're persistent, they don't give up easily, they kind of push themselves on tasks and tend to be seen as being very driven. So those are the major personality types. Conscientiousness is the perfectionist, the control-oriented person. They are high performers. A is agreeableness. They're the social glue people. They like to be liked. N is neurotic, more on the emotional, reactive end of the scale, as opposed to its opposite, adjustment, more even-keeled. O is open to experiences. They like change. They thrive in ambiguous situations where it's not clear what the right answer is. They can see things from multiple perspectives. And then E, extroversion, is the outgoing person who likes to dominate, likes to be in charge. Maybe a high need for power is another thing that's associated with that extroversion personality type. So those are the big 5 personality types. Lots of other personality types, but those come up over and over and over again and tend to dominate a lot of interpersonal interactions. They tend to be sources of strength or conflict in the workplace. And the other thing I should say is it's not that you're one and only one of those personality types. They are actually independent personality types. So in theory, you could have high levels of all 5 of those, or high or low levels of all of them. But most people tend to be dominant in one, maybe have another that's solidly above average, and then several that might be below average, and one that's kind of pretty typical levels. So that's kind of the normal profile for most people.
Well, you know, when I think about these 5, and just in maybe an example of football, right? We just had the Super Bowl and stuff. You'd see these behaviors differently, you know. So when you talk about like conscientious, you'd see they would talk about the statistics of, oh, this kicker does it 90% of the time.
Right.
You know, there's a high likability that this kicker is going to make it.
Right.
You know, he's thinking about how many sacks this, you know, guy gets and stuff like that. So he's kind of analyzing the production of the football game. You know, oh, I know that, you know, onside kick or this. He's very somebody aware of, you know, what has been done in the past, right? Yeah. The details of stuff. And so then, like, when you're looking at, so when he's talking about the game, you know, he's calculating everything. You know, oh, I don't think they're going to be able to kick it from this far. They should pass here.
Yeah.
Oh, it's
very
third.
Analytical. Yep.
Right. And so with that, you know, they've also analyzed the statistics of on 4th down and 1 to go, it's a high likelihood that we'll make this. And so that's kind of what that person will be thinking about. Now you have the person who's agreeable, and, you know, they might go for either team, you know, or they might say, well, who's the underdog? Or, you know, their concept might even...
who are the majority voting for in this game? I'll cheer with them, right? Because they want to be part of the group.
Or you'll see they'll be, you know, eating the chips with somebody else because they see somebody by themselves.
Exactly.
You know, if you see everybody watching the game and you see somebody by themselves, this is the person who is agreeable and going to want to include them, make them feel important or special. And they could talk about sewing while everybody else is talking about football.
Right.
Whatever subject it is, they're agreeable to that. You know, the neurotic one is the emotional guy who basically the wrong, the
refs
fumble,
are terrible,
right? The
up and down
interception,
wildly,
he's crying. You know, it's like, why are you crying, dude? It's a football game, and for the whole week, he's wearing black because his team lost. Yeah. Just can't keep it together. And that football game affects his kids, affects his marriage, affects his work, and that's his emotional makeup on that. Then you got the one who's the open one, and I look at it kind of like a promoter. They're, oh, this guy's going to do great. Oh, man, yeah. The excitement, of the possibilities of his team going to the Super Bowl or what it's going to look like. Or, they're always in hope, of the future and the possibilities of things. The extrovert, is a controller, and he's going to be saying, hey, I bet you this will happen. Like, he's so confident that he's right that it's like, my team's going to win. This is going to happen. I'll bet. I'll do this.
Right. He's going to be out front. He's going to be leading the cheering. He's going to be probably making the biggest boasts about his team.
Right. Every time something happens, they gain 1 yard. Yeah, you see that? I told you they're going to win. It's like, that's a yard, man. Right. But he's got to be in such control and confidence, And so that, you can see behavior groups just by the reactions of people on the same football game.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. And, we when we think about our friends, probably if you thought about each of your friends as I was describing those 5 behavior groups, you could pick out friends that had characteristics of each of those things. I tend to be personally on the outgoing side in the group settings, although not anything like I used to be. I used to crave to be the center of attention. Maybe now I've had my fill of being the center of attention, and I'm just okay if somebody else takes that role at this point in my life. But I tend to be very kind of influential in group settings. I'm not nervous in front of people ever. I'm a college professor, so I'm up in front of the room all the time. But it doesn't matter to me if I'm in front of a group of 5 or a group of 1,000. I don't get butterflies, not in the nervous, like, I wonder how this is going to go. I might be excited for the opportunity to speak, but I don't shy away from any of those situations. So I have that kind of natural extroversion kind of thing. I tend to find my way into being the one in charge in a lot of situations. I also am a fairly even-keeled person. I'm not very emotionally reactive. So you can think about yourself, and you don't even have to take a personality type to kind of test to know where you stand on these things. My wife, on the other hand, since we're talking about marriages, my wife has quite a different personality.
She's exactly the same as you.
She's not exactly the same as me. She's much more detail oriented. I tend to be a procrastinator. She is not a procrastinator. Our household, she knows where every single thing is. If you go into her office at work, her desk is clear of everything. I'm a stacker, right? I've got stacks. Once a semester, I clean off all the stuff from the last semester to start a new semester. That's my attempt at organization, right? She has well labeled, alphabetically organized files for all the documents in our family history. And my role when I go home to keep her happy, because she has this kind of high conscientiousness, high achiever kind of aspect to her personality. She organizes everything. My job is to put it back where it belongs when I'm done with it, right? So if I make a mess in the kitchen, I'd better clean it up. If I take something out of a drawer, I'd better put it back where it belongs. If I want to kind of keep the peace, right? So the old mantra of "Mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy." In my house, ain't nobody happy unless they're putting things back where it belongs when they're done with it, because she likes that level of organization. I don't mind a little bit of chaos. She also is kind of an outgoing, kind of more dominant personality type, so we kind of share that. But whereas I tend to be more sociable and agreeable with my extroversion, she's got extroversion paired with her conscientiousness, which in the workplace is a fairly powerful combination, right? Somebody who gets things done, is well organized, and has kind of this natural outgoing, I'll take charge of a group kind of personality. She has some natural leadership abilities in those ways. But my procrastination and lack of organization, and her high conscientiousness, right? I'm low on conscientiousness, she's high on conscientiousness, could be the oil and water scenario in a relationship. So she likes things a particular way. It doesn't matter to me. So I've learned in the 27 years that we've been married, I don't, since it doesn't matter to me, I'll do it her way, right? And so that's one way that we have kind of learned over time how to coexist.
Well, I think so you said basically opposites attract. And I think that's obviously a true statement. Me and my wife are different. But then also, in order to fall in love, similarities attract.
Yeah.
So I think you should see that one of your behavior groups is probably very similar to your wife. And, one of your behavior groups might be totally opposite of your wife. You can't fall in love if it's always opposite all the time.
Yeah, right.
And so I think that's where we miss it, And now with behavior groups coming into play, I think people can understand where the conflict comes from. It's not that you're a bad person, your wife's a good person, your wife's a bad person, you're a good person. It's just that you view things differently.
Yeah.
Is she better for saying, we need to have everything totally organized all the time? Now, for me, it came off of, hey, you need to start cleaning and become organized. Obviously with you, you're probably telling your wife, hey, come sit with me on the couch. Let's talk about our day. And she's busy doing stuff, you know? And so there's frustrations on both sides. But once we understand that this is their go-to, not because it's right or wrong, it's just how they are wired.
Right.
I think we can give them the grace of saying, I told John to put it back, but he didn't put it back. It's close enough. I'll slide it in place, something. But like for me, we'd come home and we'd put all the groceries away, and then I'd go get something. I'd be like, well, this isn't where it's supposed to go. And she's like, if you don't like where it's supposed to go ahead and reorganize it.
It's up to you. Right, go, feel free.
And I'm like, no, everybody needs to know the spot. The labels need to go forward. I mean, how dare you put a label backwards? I can't see what that is. Now I got to reach in. And she's like, well, then go ahead and do that. And that's an interesting thing about behaviors. We always feel like other people need to achieve our behavior.
Yeah, right. Until you go to the pantry and you open and there's a bottle of something with the label turned away. Until you saw that, you didn't even know that you wanted it that way, right? And then you're mad that they didn't read your mind and anticipate that you would want it this way. But you're not even aware that you're imposing or projecting these preferences onto somebody else. And this is, newlyweds, when we think about premarital counseling. Premarital counseling is not going to help you identify all the landmines on which you're going to step in the first couple of years of your wedding, but it can prepare you for the fact that you will be stepping on landmines that you didn't know were there as you kind of learn each other. Another example, I tend to be high on the openness to experience. I can be very spontaneous. If I'm kind of in a little bit of limbo, it doesn't bother me nearly so much. I don't mind change. In fact, I thrive on change. In my business career, I was often a change agent. I was a leader of change. Let's try things another way. Let's see if we can make this better. Whereas my wife, with her high conscientiousness, high organization, doesn't go towards change nearly as quickly. She's much more of a planner. What's step one, then step two, then step three, whereas I've got a goal that's out there, and I'll take whatever next step moves me closer to the goal, but it doesn't bother me if I don't know exactly what my next step is yet. And we had lots of discussions where she would say, but what's your plan, right? Especially when we were talking about getting married and I was thinking about, should I go to graduate school? Should I do something else? And she would get frustrated with me. What's your plan? And I said, what do you mean, what's my plan? My plan is to figure this out, right? No, she said, where do you want to be in 5 years? And I could articulate maybe 5 years from now where I wanted to be, but it didn't matter to me if I didn't have the 10-step plan to get there. I knew that I was going to be able to figure that out. Well, that made her very uncomfortable. She wanted to know so that she could anticipate, so that she could kind of prepare herself. And we had a lot of discussions, a lot of long talks trying to reconcile those things. And she had to meet me halfway, and I had to meet her halfway. And in order to make that happen, we had to communicate all the time. Right? If we had stopped communication, she would have been terribly uncomfortable. I would have been miserable because we would not have been sorting this out. And I think that would be something that would have festered and would have become something that would have eroded at the foundation of our marriage. But communicating, I learned her needs, and I learned that I needed to take steps to be more communicative, at least about what my thought process was. So as I was considering options or opportunities, here are the criteria that I'm using to evaluate these things. Here's what I'm doing to seek opportunities that are going to move me closer to my goal, right? So that she could see activity. Otherwise, she felt like I was doing nothing. There was one point she said, well, you never do anything. And I literally sat with her and I said, okay, what about the fact that at this point I was in graduate school, I'm pursuing my PhD, I was an honor student in school, I've excelled at everything I've done. What about my outcomes, if you look backwards, makes you say I don't do anything, right? I've got lots of accomplishments that show that I'm actually doing quite a bit. But what she wasn't seeing was what was happening or what I was doing to anticipate going forward, right? So she would discount all the success that I'd had in the past because she didn't know how I was thinking about the future, and she wanted to know the plan, right? That she was very uncomfortable kind of in that state of limbo. So I had to share with her my thought process so she could see what I was doing, right? Because if you're thinking, they can't see what's going on inside your head. And if I'm not volunteering what my thought process is, then she's just living in a vacuum, which to her was entirely unsettling. And similarly, she was so structured and planned that I would sometimes get upset. Like, do we have to know every single detail? Can't we just take what comes and figure it out? Right? That kind of structure made me feel like I was being locked down, right? Like,
I think that's one of the toughest things for me was seeing that my wife's behavior groups were valuable to her and important to her. And then considering she's right also. For me to overcome the difference in her mindset, the way she does things, the way she anticipates things, the way she desires things, the way, they have this communication is everything. Well, communication adds a whole different dynamic when you're talking about personalities. Because a personality of somebody, who's agreeable, they're going to take it as, oh, okay, sure, do this.
Right.
Somebody who basically is more analytical, they're going to go into the thought of, well, what will the payment be? Well, what will the insurance be? Well, how much more time is this going to take? Well, how long are you going to have to do it? Well, what are going to be the results? And like when you're a husband and wife and the husband saying, or the wife saying, I want to start a business, and then the other person, is basically conscientious and they're saying, well, but we have this, how are we going to pay for this bill? Well, what are the kids going to go through? Well, what about our vacation time? Well, what about the house payment? Well, what happens if you don't have the success in the business? How much is it going to cost? Well, what if it costs more than $10,000? What if it costs more than $20,000? What if you fail? What are we going to do if we lose that? And so for them, that conversation is normal.
Right. It's not emotional, right? It's not like they're attacking a person. This is just their thought process. They're just, and if they're asking you all those questions, it's a sign that they're sharing that thought process with you, right?
Because they want basically the consideration for them. That's communication.
Right.
If you're an agreeable person, then you're like, well, why are you so hard on me? Why do you demand so much from me? It's going to work, I promise. And sometimes that happens. Like for me, I'm probably more agreeable or, just by the flat of my pants and open, I'm open. And so I'm like, I'm going to do this. And my wife's like, yeah, but... And I'm like, why don't you support me? And she's not saying she doesn't support me, but I have to give her the right information to be able to digest that, yes, together I commit to this. And I think that's kind of, communication and personality is really one of the biggest problems in marriage.
Yeah. Well, and I think that one of the things that people struggle with in relationships is this feeling that they're not being heard. And, when one person's talking and they might be voicing their own concerns, the other person who isn't feeling that their needs are being addressed by the dialogue of this person is feeling like they're not even listening to me, right? And so we can end up talking past each other. You don't feel like you're being supported. Your wife doesn't feel like her needs are being addressed. And even though you're both open to trying this business out, right? No one has said no. She may, in fact, be excited about the prospects, but she's got questions. If we do this, if and when, she might be thinking, if and when we do this, we got to figure all this stuff out. You feel like she's so into the weeds and I don't even feel like she's listening to me, when in fact you're both excited about the same thing, right? And so you can be emotionally at odds with each other and allow that to build up, when in fact you just aren't connecting, right? You're actually saying the same things, but we're not saying them in a way that connects with each other. And that's a dangerous thing, because relationships change over time. And we don't often get the full picture of who we're married to until we're 15 years in. And what I mean by that is, when you first meet somebody and you start dating, you think, oh, I like this person, I like that person, and opposites can attract, and I'm so rigid, but they're so spontaneous, and I love that about them, and so forth. Well, then you get married and you start taking on responsibilities together. Maybe you're out of. I met my wife when I was in college, right? So we both had a lot of free time. She was working on her stuff, I was working on my stuff. We weren't interdependent yet. So we started dating. When we got married, I was in graduate school, she was working. But then there came a time when we were both working for a short period of time before we started having kids. Now we're kind of being pulled in different directions, and we each have different things on our mind. Did we really learn to communicate? Well, we learned to communicate about some things, but not about these new things we're facing. Then kids come along, right? When kids come along, everything changes, because now you have other people that you have to care for, right? It's not like, if this doesn't work out, I'll land on my feet, I'll figure it out, I'll pick myself up, I'll move on. Well, if you don't make this work, we've got to figure this out. And now, the family's vulnerable, and you've got a whole nother level of complexity in the mix. And again, if your wife wants to know the answers to these things, she's looking out for the best interest in her heart of the family and the needs of the kids and so forth. You think you're doing the same thing by saying, if I start this business, it could mean so much more for our family in terms of financial security, and in terms of who we are as a family and what we're able to do as a family. And so you might have the same concerns at heart, but you're not connecting. I often said to my wife, when I got married to you, I had no idea that she would be such a wonderful mother to our children, right? That wasn't even on my radar screen when we got married, because I didn't know what it meant to be a father or to be a mother. Right. Now, it turns out she is, but when you have kids into the mix, both parents, both spouses, begin to have a whole different set of concerns that were never on the radar screen again, and you have to relearn again how to communicate and what the other person's kind of hot buttons are, and what their real needs are, and what their priorities are. So communication is not something that you just do once and you figure it all out and then everything's good for the rest of your relationship. But communication is something that you deal with. It's fundamental, because when you aren't the same personality types and you don't naturally meet each other's communications needs, you just got to communicate more to figure out what those connection points are until it is a natural thing.
Right. And, we think if I say something, then that's communicating to you. If I tell my daughter, and we're going to get into kid personality and parenting next week, but if I tell my daughter, not tonight, I'm not going to read to you tonight, or I can't, it's already late, or something like that, or she's like, well, fine, you don't love me then. Right. She basically goes neurotic, right? It's all emotions, and it's not because she's a girl, it's because that's her behavior group is, you don't want to spend time with me. You're rejecting me. I can't believe it. And my wife's a little bit of the same. So my wife will go, man, I thought about you all day. Did you think about me? And I'm like, no, I was at work. I did this, I did that. And like for her, like I was just being honest, man, you believe what I'm thinking about all day long. I'm not sitting there, man, I can't wait. Oh, I'm going to get home. I'm going to kiss her. I'm working. I'm thinking, And so I told my wife that. That's bad news. I know. I'm the worst husband ever. So I told my wife, I said, I'm not thinking about you. I'm thinking about work. And, she's like, oh, what?
Right. She's crestfallen.
Right. And I'm like, I'm sorry. I thought you really wanted to know what I was thinking, Yeah. And we talk about that sometimes, and I'll say, are you fishing? Because like if I know she's fishing, then I might respond differently. And she basically told me, she's like, well, I'm always fishing.
Yeah, right.
And so now I'm understanding everything she's saying. She's fishing, and so I need to hook into that,
right.
And that's what I'm saying, like, did I communicate and say what the question was? Are you thinking about me? I communicated?
Yeah.
No, I'm not.
Right.
but it was the wrong communication based on her personality group.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to say. When I say to my daughter, hey, I couldn't read tonight to you, did I communicate that properly? Could have I said, oh, baby, I love you so much. You're so fantastic. You're my favorite of my 4. And they're all my favorite. And really kind of take the time instead of just giving her a hard no.
Right.
Yeah. And that's what I need to be aware of is the personalities between me and my wife and kids and so on. So
yeah. So the neurotic person, you know where you stand with them, right? Because you can read their emotions. The agreeable person, on the other hand, they might be just as crushed and crestfallen that you can't spend time with them or read with them tonight, but they're not going to tell you about it because they don't want to make waves, right? They want to, but that to me that can be, if you don't understand that, you can walk all over them and not even be aware of the fact that you've just crushed their spirit because you're just saying, it's late. I can't read with you. It can be. It's that matter of fact, but to them, it's Daddy doesn't love me. Or when you do that to your spouse, who has this agreeableness about them, you're saying, oh no, I wasn't thinking about it. It's not. They're not going to come back with you. Well, with their emotions, they're going to usually clam up, and it's going to feed maybe some insecurity that they have, and you don't know what you've just done to them unless you're kind of aware of. These are their needs, and this is who they are, and I need to be sensitive to that. And that does take time, and it takes effort. It takes work to communicate and to understand who that person is, so that you can read much subtler cues. You've been married now, you said, for 16 years. Well, you've learned a lot about your wife and how to communicate with your wife. She's told you, I'm always fishing, right? So now all right, she just threw out a lure, and she's jerking a little bit. I better latch in and
And I still miss it all the time.
Yeah, well, yeah. But she also has learned you, right? She knows who you are. She knows that maybe you're not thinking about or dwelling on things the way that she is over the course of the day. But that makes it, when you say, oh, honey, right in the middle of the day, I thought about you, and here's what I thought. Even if for you it was a passing thought, if you share that passing thought, she's going to go, oh, he thought of me, right? And that's going to mean that much more. So as we learn each other and we learn to be sensitive to the other person's needs, oftentimes we don't have to go all the way over to where they are and morph into them, right? Because that would make you uncomfortable if you had to gush on and on and on about how you thought about your wife all day long, and she was constantly when that's a farce, right? Because you were just absorbed in the issues of the day at work. But if you did for a moment
I would
think
almost
about
feel
her,
like I was lying.
Yeah, right.
Right. Oh yeah, I mean,
you're putting on something that isn't true. It would feel like you were putting on a front. It would not feel authentic to you. But for her, as she gets to know you, when you did have that moment, and for you it might have been a moment, if you share that moment with her, it will begin to feel to her as if you thought about her all day. Right? Because she knows what that was for you to have that thought in the middle of your day. And if you share that with her, it's going to give her what she needs. And similarly, she may give you the space that you need to be who you are. And that's that's something that we have to learn over time. And it's not a natural thing. The things that naturally attract us to the person might become the very things at a later point in our relationship that we begin to resent about the person, because what once was refreshing now is rubbing us the wrong way. Now is a sign of neglect. And we can't fully change who we are in relationships, and the relationship would not be what it was if either side did. But on the other hand, we have to learn how to meet each other and how to connect with each other in that context of that relationship,
and do it in an authentic way. So my wife,
in an authentic way,
she's great because she'll hear something or do something, and I'll come home and she'll be like, I just want to let you know that you're a good father, you're a good provider, you're a good supporter. And she starts saying all these things. Now for me, like, I don't need words of affirmation.
Yeah.
So she's saying all those things and she doesn't do it a lot. And so I'm sitting there saying, this is not your personality, one. Right. Gush all this stuff to me. She's, she is who she is. And so then, like, two, to me, like, it doesn't, it doesn't pat me on the back, my personality wise.
Yeah.
So
you might begin to feel like, when's the other shoe going to drop here, right? What are you fishing for?
What is she trying, or who did she talk to, or and that's what I think we need to find, as she needs to communicate her love, respect, whatever, honor, communication, the way that she wants to, with a hint of what I want. But I think that's the kind of the important thing is it's not a one-all fit-all. Wives, tell your husbands how great they are. Husbands, tell your wives how great they are. It's really learning your personality of conversation.
Right.
On the flip side, some people will agree with this, and I know I always say dumb things but here it goes. On the flip side, I don't always like words of affirmation, but I don't really give a lot of apologies either. Do I see that I'm wrong? Yes. Am I wrong a lot? Yes. But I don't have much of a conversation of, man, I shouldn't have done that. Because my personality is my thought, basically I've analyzed this, I've thought about this like a controller, This is what I think, and so I say it. Now, what happens is I said it, but I didn't think about that other person. I just was in my controlling thought, and I spit it out there, and I didn't think about the result. And so I find that I don't apologize a lot, which isn't great, by any means.
It's not.
but there are people. When I told somebody the other day, they said, "Oh my God, I don't apologize either." I'm not trying to be rude by saying I don't apologize. I'm saying that yes, it's probably a huge flaw, but that's in my personality, and that's in other people's personality. And so when you're married, if somebody's not a big apologizer, it might be some of their, they might not loathe good words of kindness. They might not say sorry. And that's a personality that we have to look at. It's not just that they're absolutely a rude person, hatred person, bitter person. It's just not their personality.
Yeah. And to that point, if you act with integrity, like if, for example, you never give an apology, but you expect everybody else to give you apologies, then that would say something's amiss to me. Right. But on the other hand, if you don't expect apologies from others, you just kind of, okay, that makes sense. Let's move on, right? You kind of maybe understand or know their heart, and so when they say things and it comes out the wrong way, it doesn't bother you in the least. Well, that would be kind of consistent, right? So that you don't expect apologies from others. It doesn't occur to you to think about apologizing to someone. But sometimes problems arise when you want it both ways, right? I'm never going to apologize, but then I get mad if you don't apologize to me when you make me upset, right? Now there's I think kind of, again, seeds for discontent in that relationship. And a big part of understanding personality types is certainly understanding ourselves. But if we really want to build relationships, it's learning the personality types of others and what their needs are, and then striving to say, what do I do to meet the needs of others, right? Because what does Christ call us to do, or Paul actually? Be all things to all people, right? He doesn't say, be who you are, and if they don't like it, they can lump it. That's not what Paul wrote. He said, be all things to all people. He said, submit unto one another as unto the Lord, right? So he calls us to think more of others than ourselves in our relationships. And that principle is true in marriage relationships just as much as it is with brothers and sisters in the church. And so, what love is sacrificing oneself for the good of someone else. And in fact, in marriage relationships, men are called to love their wives. Wives are called to obey their husbands. Well, my wife tells me all the time, your command is a much more stringent command than mine, right? All I have to do is obey you, but you have to love me. And, if you really think about that as husbands in a relationship, what does love mean? Well, what did Christ say? No greater love has a man than this, that a man might lay down his life for his friends, which he then went out and did, right? He told that to his disciples at the Last Supper, just before he walked out and was taken to his death on the cross, right? So he said, love, the truest definition of love is, are you willing to die for your friends? Are you willing to give up everything of yourself for your spouse? So when we think about the dynamics in a marriage relationship, that's what we're called to do. And a lot of marriage relationships, people get into this, if they don't reciprocate, I'm not obligated, right? So if you don't do this for me, then I don't have to do this for you. But the dynamic in the marriage relationship, as given to us by the Bible, is fundamentally different. We are both called to sacrifice everything about ourselves for the other person, for the good of the other person. Now, if we play this, if you don't do this for me, then I don't have to for you, and because you did this, I get to do this, right? If we start playing this reciprocation game, then we're always going to be at odds because the scales aren't ever going to balance at any particular moment in time. They're always going to be lopsided in someone's favor, and the other person's going to resent that if we're thinking about this equal reciprocation kind of thing. But on the other hand, if both parties are pouring themselves in and saying, I'm going to give everything I have for your good, both sides win, right? Both sides are receiving the blessing and the love and the honor from the other person, and both sides will feel like I can't outgive the other person here, but I'm going to try, right? I'll die trying, and that's the dynamic of the relationship. Both sides sacrificing everything for the other person, and as a result, both sides get everything in return. But when we think about the scales, and in personalities, is the same way, right? If we think about what my personality is, and they're not meeting my needs in my personality, then we've got the seeds for our destruction. If we think about their personality and what am I going to do everything I can to meet that person where they are, now we've got the seeds for our success, right? So personalities have both the seeds for our failures in our relationships and the seeds for our success in relationships.
So for me, I warred with my wife. It was kind of who was going to be right. I'm right about this, you're wrong about that. You do this so that I'm, we warred against each other because of these personality differences, and because personalities bring out expectations. Her expectation was, 4 times spent, love, nurturing, these things, and mine was I got to get things done. I gotta do, and so. One of the things, first steps, to balancing things out was to consider the likeness that we had with each other. Where are we like? What is the good? Not what is the bad. I want to do this, you want to do that. But what do we want to do? Where can we see common ground?
Where do we meet each other? Yeah.
And so that was the first thing that was beneficial in personality groups. We basically both went through these courses, to understand that. And then after that, the next step, and basically I think that's what you were just talking about, that is above personality groups, is love the other person. Now, I know a lot of people, when we say that, initially they'll say, oh, all I do is love that person. Oh, all I do is give that person. In loving, and it looks differently. I know every time when I got married, and I say every time, I only got married once. So I know when I got married, every time after that, I would see this commonality with my guy friends. And they would buy a house, they would fix it up, and, the girl would be doing everything with the wedding, but the guy was ultra focused on the house. And I was too. I bought a house, I fixed it up, and then I noticed that same trait with everybody else. And, it's good and it's needed, but the girl would always say, all he's doing is focus on the house. He doesn't talk to me. We don't spend time together. He's working, then goes to the house, and then goes back to work, and then goes to the house. And so the girl's trying to get ready for this marriage, and, what's the conversation and love and all that. And the guy's like, I'm task-oriented, got to get this house done, so. And I noticed that immediately there were 2 huge different thought processes, in the way that we feel we need to achieve things and behaviors. But that thought of love covers all, love is the thing. And a lot of times we feel like, well, the guy will say, well, I'm building the house. Doesn't she know how much I love her by looking at this house that I'm providing for her? And she's saying, well, I want your heart, not your house. I want your time, not your house. And so that's what love, we feel immediately separated, a lot of times. Like the guy feels like he's giving love by building the house. The girl feels like she's giving love by giving her life in marriage. And so a lot of times we feel like we are giving the other person love, but we're truly not giving them the kind of love.
They're not receiving what we're giving. Right.
You know, and so even that behaviors and communications and stuff. But I do love the idea where you're talking about, you know, if we're focused on the behaviors of things, you're going to war with each other.
Yes.
But if you focus on love, it will supersede all behaviors, and you'll be able to be connected.
Yeah, and we'll learn to set those things aside when we become aware that they're not meeting the needs of the other person, right? Because we're putting the needs of the other person first. And, you know, relationships are a challenge because I've been married for 27 years, and there are still times when I think that I'm being neglected, right? Maybe I'm tired, maybe I'm just, but there are times in a life where my wife works, where we have 4 kids, where we've got 3 cats and a dog. Sometimes I feel like, man, even these cats get fed before I get fed in this place. You know, we will get caught up in our own minds. But I think the Lord puts us in these relationships to teach us that it's not about you. In our relationship with God, it's not about us, it's about God, right? And we find the greatest fulfillment when we're focusing on God, when we're doing what we can to give glory to God. Then we find our true fulfillment because He created us for that very purpose. And we can get kind of in our own heads and even believe that what we're doing is really not for us, it's for the other person. But if the other person isn't asking for it and doesn't want it, even though our motivation we think that we're doing this for the good of the other person, shouldn't they be the judge of that, right? Shouldn't they be the one that decides, and how do we deal with that, and how do we set that aside? Now, is building a house or redoing a house so that your family has a nice place to live, a secure place to live, a safe place to live, a warm place to live, all those things are good things. But on the other hand, that can't be the highest priority when the other person in the relationship around which this family will be based is saying, you're spending all your time over there and you're not investing in this relationship. So again, are we willing to communicate? Communicate is not just saying things, it's listening as well, right? And communication is not done until the other person understands the message that we're sending. And that is a two-way street. Are we really understanding what the other person is saying to us? And how do we show that we understand? Is it just repeating back to them what they said? I heard what you said. You said this. Or are we really like listening behind the intent of the words? What's the heart of what the person is saying?
Well, I know for me, with my wife, I would say something and she would feel very accused. And I'm like, I'm not trying to say something bad to you. I'm just trying to say, here's a fact, XYZ. And she would feel like I'm saying, you're a bad mother, you're a bad wife, I can't believe, bad person.
Yeah, right, that's how she's receiving it, right?
Right, and so I'd have to, we worked years on this of, let's have a conversation. Let's talk about the subject, not each other. Let's talk about what you would like to see in this subject. Not that you're doing it wrong, but the subject itself. What do you think about this idea on the subject? The subject could be cleaning. What do you think about cleaning? Do you think the house should be cleaned all the time? Once a week? Once a month? Do you think it should be chemical clean? Do you think it should be organized? I've noticed that also. Like, some people are just really organizers, but they don't like to do chemical clean. Some people like to chemical clean it. Basically, there's so many different thoughts about cleaning. And so if I were to say, the house needs to be this way, and she's like, well, the house doesn't need to be this way. We need to be at basketball practice. We need to be at church. We need to be here. You need to be this. And so I think for communicating, based off both of our personalities, I had to create a table of saying, what do you think first about the subject? And now that I understand what you think and how you feel about the subject, how do you want to react on a weekly, daily basis about this subject? Do you want to have the kids do it? Do you want to have somebody come in? Do you want to do it? Do you want me to do it? And I think that brings up the ability of open and honest communication, allowing both personality groups to come into play.
Yeah, and without kind of emotional baggage, that like I said, landmines, where the other person's receiving something that's very different than what you intend. I told you, I think it wasn't on this podcast, it was another one that we did. I told you one of my favorite psychologist jokes about the guy that goes to see his therapist, and his therapist says, "So how did things go this week?" And he knew that his client had been struggling with his relationship with his mother-in-law. I said, "Well," he said, "it was going okay, but Friday night we went over to my in-laws for dinner, and something happened." He said, "Well, tell me what happened." He said, "Well, we were sitting at dinner, and everything was fine, and I looked at my mother-in-law, and I meant to say to her, 'Would you please pass the butter?'" And he said, "Okay, well, what happened?" He said, "Well, I meant to say, 'Please pass the butter,' but what I said was, 'You've ruined my life, you fat, ugly cow.'" Right? Now, the difficult thing in relationships is sometimes you actually say, "Would you please pass the butter?" But what they hear you say is, "You've ruined my life, you fat, ugly cow." Right. And you're going, "Wait a minute, I just asked for the butter," right? And that's all that you thought it was. You talked about cleaning. I need to know what you mean by clean.
Right.
And, but the other person might be feeling like you're attacking them because you feel like the house is a mess and they're not doing their, you think I'm miserable at handling these responsibilities because you think I don't know what clean is. And, no, and you're saying, "No, I just really want to know what your expectations are so that I can do what I can to help you meet those expectations in any way that I can." Right. So you're saying, "What do you mean by clean?" And what they're hearing is, "You've ruined my life, you fat, ugly cow." Right. And again, we have to understand that communication process is full of these personality or behavior type biases, maybe emotional things tied to other things that we don't know about the person yet from their past. And, that's why it takes a lifetime to really get to know another person so that we really can communicate with them and we can have, like you said, open, honest communication and both sides have their needs and to be heard met as well as their needs to voice their concerns met. So, when you think about relationships, they can make your head spin. And it is work. And there are times we say, "I just wish I had a break. Where's the pause button? How do I get out of this mess?" My escapist, I used to have these fantasies of escape. And you know what it was? I wanted to be an over-the-road trucker where I could climb into the cab of a truck and I could just drive and nobody would talk to me and I could just do my thing, right? All in isolation. That was my escapist fantasy. Now, actually, I'm busy enough, and I crave time with my wife enough that when I think about that, I want to be in a motorhome with my wife sitting over there, not an over-the-road truck anymore. But we all have those moments where we're saying, "Boy, it'd be so much easier if I just wasn't in the middle of all this." But on the other hand, it might be easier, but it's not going to be nearly as fulfilling, right? It's not going to be nearly as fulfilling as sharing that relationship with another person.
Yeah, it's interesting because even though I don't think about my wife or stuff like that while I'm working, I love just being at home with her. Like for me, that's my sanctuary. Go home, hang out at the house. Like I'm a homebody. And maybe I've never told her that. Like, man, yeah, I didn't think about you. I was busy at working, but boy, I'm glad to be here now.
Right.
Just doing that little extra step of, communicating, sharing, allowing love to be love,
Yeah.
So thank you so much for coming in and coming forth with all this information. I know it's a lot for people to take in one sitting, but it's a start, and it's there's other books and resources out there for people to follow up on this. So you could either look up ocean or canoe personality groups, and I'm sure there's a lot of good books and things out there. Closing words.
Yep. Closing words. Well, when you were saying about your wife and you love to be a homebody, it reminded me of the Billy Joel song where he says, "Home is just another word for you." Right, and that's what we strive for. And I know a lot of relationships, home is the most miserable place, right? And both parties dread going home because of this relationship and how things have gone askew. But the best thing that God wants for us in our relationships is for our spouse to be our refuge, right? To be where we feel most at home, where we feel most accepted, and where we're able to create that same environment for the other person. And that is incredibly fulfilling.
Man, that's awesome. Thank you so much for coming. Until next time.